The air inside the bar carried a comforting stillness, interrupted only by the clinking of glasses and low murmurs of conversation. Dim, amber lights cast a soft glow over the wooden walls, their surfaces etched with years of memories from the regulars. Faded photographs and old license plates hung haphazardly, giving the space a homey, lived-in feel. The bartender, a middle-aged woman with a sharp wit and an easy smile, moved with practiced ease, pouring beers and exchanging friendly banter with the few patrons scattered around. Near the jukebox in the corner, an older couple debated song choices, their laughter filling the room. At a table by the window, two off-duty mechanics discussed weekend plans over a pitcher of beer, their hands still grimy from a long day of work. In the farthest corner of the room, an older man sat alone at a small table. He wore a weathered military jacket, the fabric faded but clean, with a few medals pinned to his chest. His posture was upright, his demeanor calm and composed. His eyes, though quiet, seemed to carry a weight of stories untold. He nursed a glass of beer, his fingers lightly drumming against the table as if keeping time with an invisible tune. The distant rumble of engines grew louder, breaking the peaceful rhythm of the bar. Conversations paused, heads turned toward the windows as the sound of motorcycles filled the night. Moments later, the heavy creak of the bar door signaled their arrival. 4 men entered, their boots thudding heavily against the wooden floor. Leather jackets adorned with patches and chains glistened under the dim lights. The leader, a burly man with a thick beard and a permanent smirk, scanned the room with an air of entitlement. Behind him, his crew, equally rough around the edges, fanned out, their loud laughter cutting through the quiet atmosphere like a knife. "Nice little place you got here," the leader drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm as he approached the bar. He leaned heavily on the counter, gesturing for the bartender to pour drinks. "What's your best whiskey?" "Never mind, I'll just take the whole bottle." The bartender's expression tightened, but she complied, her movements cautious. The regulars kept their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Even the older couple by the jukebox fell silent, retreating to their table. As the bikers made themselves at home, their voices grew louder, dominating the space. One of them eyed the veteran in the corner, nudging his friend with a grin. "Hey, check out Grandpa over there. But he's got some more stories," he said, his tone mocking. The veteran remained still, his gaze fixed on his drink, unbothered by the comment. The biker chuckled, leaning closer as if sizing him up. Unaware of the storm they were about to provoke, the bikers continued their antics, the air in the bar growing thick with tension. The bikers quickly took over the bar, their loud banter echoing off the wooden walls. One of them cranked the jukebox, interrupting the soft rock playlist with a rowdy country anthem. The leader, now seated at the center of the bar with a bottle of whiskey in hand, barked a laugh that silenced the remaining murmurs of the patrons. "Don't just sit there like statues," he hollered, raising his glass. "Let's get some life in this place." The regulars kept their distance, shifting nervously in their seats. The older couple exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier joy replaced with apprehension. At the far table, the mechanics muttered under their breath but didn't dare look up. The bartender worked briskly, her forced smile betraying her discomfort as she poured drinks and tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy. The group's attention soon shifted to the veteran. One of the bikers, a wiry man with a tattoo snaking up his neck, leaned over to his companion. "Hey, check out that old-timer in the corner. Think he even knows what century it is." The leader smirked, swirling his glass, probably waiting for his discount beer. "But he's got a whole pocket full of coupons." Another biker chimed in, louder this time. "Hey, old man, don't drink too much. You might not make it to tomorrow." The veteran didn't respond, his calm demeanor unchanged. He took another sip of his beer, his fingers still drumming lightly against the table. His silence seemed to embolden the bikers, who mistook it for fear. The tattooed biker nudged his leader. "Think he's deaf or just dumb?" he said with a laugh. "Maybe we should say hello properly." The leader tilted his head, considering. "Might as well. Can't have him thinking we don't appreciate his service," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. They approached the veteran's table, their boots heavy against the floor. The other patrons tensed, some exchanging worried looks, but no one dared to intervene. The bar's atmosphere had shifted entirely, the earlier sense of camaraderie replaced by unease. The leader leaned on the veteran's table, his whiskey glass in hand. "Hey, Grandpa," he said mockingly. "That's a nice jacket you've got there. Military, huh? What's that, Vietnam? Or were you just playing dress up?" The veteran's gaze slowly lifted, meeting the leader's eyes. His expression remained neutral, calm. He didn't speak, but the intensity of his stare made the leader shift uncomfortably, even if he didn't show it outright. "What's the matter?" the tattooed biker chimed in, stepping closer. "Cat got your tongue?" Still, the veteran said nothing. He simply leaned back slightly, his hands resting loosely on his lap, his posture completely relaxed. The quiet tension in his demeanor was unnerving, but the bikers brushed it off as cowardice. The leader's smirk widened as he picked up the veteran's beer, inspecting the glass. "This what they serve in retirement homes these days," he said, tossing the glass aside. It shattered against the floor, making the entire bar flinch. The veteran's hand twitched for the first time, but he remained seated, his expression unchanging. The leader mistook this slight movement as a sign of submission and leaned closer, his voice dropping. "You don't belong here, old man. Maybe it's time for you to shuffle back to whatever hole you crawled out of." The tattooed biker chuckled. "Might need a walker to help him out the door," he said, nudging the veteran's chair with his boot. Still, the veteran didn't respond. But his silence wasn't one of fear. It was calculating, deliberate. The other patrons watched in frozen anticipation, sensing the growing storm beneath the surface. The bartender took a cautious step forward, but a sharp glare from the leader made her stop in her tracks. The bikers, oblivious to the danger, continued to push. "Come on, old man," the leader taunted. "You got nothing to say for yourself?" The veteran finally shifted in his chair, his hands moving slowly to rest on the arms of the seat. His calm voice broke the silence for the first time. "You should leave," he said quietly, the weight of his words sinking into the air like a stone. The leader laughed. "Or what? You gonna teach us a lesson, Grandpa?" The veteran's eyes narrowed, his calm exterior hiding a storm ready to erupt. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point, and the bikers were about to learn they had made a grave mistake. The air was thick with tension as the leader smirked at the veteran's warning. "You're funny, old man, but jokes won't save you." The veteran remained seated, his gaze steady. The leader reached out to shove the veteran's shoulder, but before his hand made contact, the veteran moved with lightning speed. His hand shot up, grabbing the leader's wrist in a vice-like grip. The leader's smirk disappeared, replaced by a flicker of pain as the veteran twisted his arm just enough to force him to his knees. The bar fell silent, all eyes on the scene unfolding. The other bikers snapped out of their shock and lunged toward the veteran, but he was already in motion. Rising from his chair with practiced precision, he used the leader's momentum against him, flipping him onto the floor with a loud thud. The first biker to reach him, the wiry man with the snake tattoo, swung wildly. The veteran sidestepped with ease, delivering a calculated blow to the man's midsection. The biker doubled over, gasping for air, and the veteran followed up with a sharp elbow to the back of his head, sending him sprawling onto the floor. Another biker grabbed a stool, swinging it toward the veteran, but he ducked, letting the stool crash harmlessly against the wall. Before the biker could recover, the veteran swept his legs out from under him with a fluid kick. The man landed hard, groaning in pain. The leader scrambled to his feet, pulling a knife from his jacket. "You're dead, old man," he growled, lunging forward. But the veteran's training kicked in, and he effortlessly disarmed him with a precise twist of the wrist, sending the knife clattering to the floor. A follow-up strike to the leader's chest sent him crashing back into a table, shattering it beneath his weight. The patrons watched in stunned silence, their fear giving way to awe. The older couple by the jukebox clutched each other, their eyes wide with disbelief. The two mechanics exchanged glances, one of them muttering, "Did you see that? He moved like a damn ninja." The bartender, who had been frozen in place, finally found her voice. "Stop! That's enough!" she yelled, though her voice trembled. The veteran paused, standing amidst the chaos. His breathing was steady, his expression calm, as if the fight had been nothing more than a routine exercise. Around him, the bikers were either unconscious or groaning in pain on the floor. One patron, emboldened by the veteran's actions, stood and shouted, "Serves them right. They've been terrorizing this place for too long." A few others clapped and cheered, though most remained cautiously seated, unsure if the bikers were truly done. The bartender approached the veteran cautiously. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. He nodded once, his sharp eyes scanning the room to ensure the threat had been neutralized. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice steady. "They won't be bothering you again." The leader, groaning in pain, struggled to push himself up from the wreckage of the table. Blood trickled from a cut above his brow, and his cocky demeanor had been replaced with pure fear. You're crazy," he stammered, clutching his ribs. The veteran stepped closer, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. He picked up the leader's knife from the ground, examining it briefly before tossing it across the room, where it landed harmlessly behind the bar. "Crazy," the veteran said, his voice calm but laced with an edge of steel. "No, just trained." The leader shrank back, his bravado completely gone. "Look, man, we didn't mean anything by it," he said, raising his hands in surrender. "We were just messing around." The veteran crouched down to meet the leader's gaze, his eyes cold and unyielding. "Messing around?" he repeated. "You come in here, harass good people, and think you can walk away without consequences?" The leader opened his mouth to respond, but the veteran cut him off. "You think a little leather and some loud engines make you tough? I've seen real tough men who didn't come back from where I've been. You're nothing." The leader looked away, unable to hold the veteran's piercing gaze. The other bikers, still recovering from the beating, avoided eye contact altogether, their earlier arrogance replaced by shame and fear. "Now get out," the veteran said, standing to his full height. "And if I ever see you in this bar again, you won't walk out next time." The bikers scrambled to their feet, helping each other as they limped toward the exit. The leader paused at the door, casting one last glance at the veteran. The cold, unflinching look he received in return was enough to send him scurrying out into the night. The bar fell silent as the last of the bikers stumbled out the door, their groans and curses fading into the night. For a moment, no one moved. The veteran stood in the center of the room, his posture relaxed, but his presence commanding, like a storm that had just passed but left an unmistakable impression. His calm demeanor seemed to absorb the chaos around him, as though the shattered glass and overturned chairs were nothing more than minor inconveniences. The bartender broke the silence, her voice shaky but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, stepping cautiously from behind the counter. She glanced around the room, taking in the damage, then back at the veteran. "I don't know what would have happened if you weren't here." He nodded slightly, as if her thanks were unnecessary. "They won't be back," he said simply, his tone matter of fact. He bent down and began righting a fallen chair, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Despite the destruction, he seemed entirely unaffected, as though such events were routine for him. One of the mechanics rose from his table, his expression a mixture of awe and curiosity. "That was incredible," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't just fight them, you dismantled them." The veteran offered a faint smile, but didn't respond. Instead, he retrieved his coat from the back of his chair and slipped it on with quiet precision. The medals on his chest glinted briefly under the dim light, a reminder of a history that needed no explanation. The older couple by the jukebox finally found their voices. "We've been coming here for years," the man said, his hand still gripping his wife's. "Those bikers have been terrorizing this place for weeks. You just put an end to it like it was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," the veteran replied, his voice low but steady. He adjusted his jacket and looked around the room, his gaze briefly meeting each person's eyes. "I've dealt with worse, but people like that, they count on fear. Take that away, and they've got nothing." The bartender poured a fresh glass of beer and set it on the counter. "On the house," she said, her smile genuine now. "It's the least I can do." He hesitated for a moment before nodding in thanks. He approached the bar, his boots crunching on shards of broken glass. Taking the glass in hand, he raised it slightly toward the room, a silent acknowledgement of the gratitude directed at him. He took a single sip before placing it back on the counter. The patrons began to stir, the tension in the air slowly dissipating as they exchanged murmurs of disbelief and admiration. The bartender grabbed a broom and started sweeping up the broken glass, occasionally stealing glances at the veteran. "You've got a gift," she said, her tone light but respectful. "Not just for fighting, but for keeping calm. Most people would have lost their heads." "It's not a gift," he replied, his tone tinged with a trace of weariness. "It's years of learning when to act and when to stand down." As he prepared to leave, one of the younger patrons, emboldened by the veteran's calm presence, called out, "Hey sir, what branch did you serve in?" The veteran paused by the door, his hand resting lightly on the frame. For a moment, it seemed he wouldn't answer. Then, without turning around, he said quietly, "Marine Corps." The room erupted in hushed exclamations, the weight of his words adding another layer to the respect already palpable in the air. He didn't wait for further questions. Instead, he stepped out into the night, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft thud. Inside, the patrons began to piece the room back together. The bartender looked out the window, watching the veteran disappear into the darkness. "He's a hero," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. The older man near the jukebox nodded. "No," he said, his voice filled with reverence. "He's more than that." Though the night had begun with chaos, it ended with an unshakable sense of unity among the patrons, who now shared a story they would tell for years. But even as they recounted the events and marveled at the veterans' actions, they knew one thing for certain. They just witnessed the kind of strength and discipline that couldn't be taught, only earned. The door to the bar swung closed with a faint creak, leaving the patrons in a mixture of awe and disbelief. Outside, the veteran walked down the dimly lit street, his steps steady and unhurried. The cool night air brushed against his face, and for the first time that evening, he allowed himself to exhale fully. The adrenaline that had kept him sharp during the encounter began to ebb, leaving behind the familiar ache in his joints, a reminder of years spent pushing his body to its limits. Back in the bar, the patrons were still buzzing with conversation. The older couple shared the story of how the bikers had harassed the bar for weeks, pushing people around and leaving without paying. "We thought it would never stop," the woman said, shaking her head. "Who knew someone like him would walk in tonight?" The bartender continued sweeping up glass, but paused long enough to chime in. He didn't even flinch. It was like he knew exactly what to do, like he'd been through worse 100 times. "He probably has," one of the mechanics added. "That's the kind of guy who's seen things we can't imagine." As they spoke, the leader of the bikers sat slumped against the side of his motorcycle in the parking lot, his face pale and his hands trembling. The rest of his crew gathered around him, nursing their bruises and cuts. "We're not going back there," one of them muttered, his voice shaking. "Not after what he did." The leader didn't respond. He stared at the ground, replaying the fight in his mind. He had thought he was invincible, that no one in a small town like this could stand up to him. But the veteran's eyes, those calm, unyielding eyes, had told him everything he needed to know. He had underestimated the wrong man. Meanwhile, the veteran reached his small truck parked a few blocks away. He opened the door and slid inside, pausing to glance at his reflection in the rearview mirror. For a moment, his expression softened, and a flicker of emotion crossed his face. He pulled an old photograph from the glove compartment. Two young men in uniform, their arms slung around each other, smiling for the camera. One of them was him, decades younger, but unmistakable. The other man's face was now only a memory, one of the countless reasons he had learned to fight and endure. He placed the photo back in its place and started the engine. The hum of the truck was steady, almost soothing, as he drove down the empty streets. Tonight had been a reminder of the life he had left behind. The discipline, the instinct, the ability to assess danger in a split second. But it was also a reminder of why he had left it behind. Violence, even when justified, came with a price, one he had paid too many times. At the bar, the bartender finished cleaning up and locked the doors for the night. She turned to the remaining patrons, her expression thoughtful. You know, she said, we don't even know his name. Maybe it's better that way. One of the mechanics replied. A guy like that doesn't do it for thanks. He just does what's right. The older man by the jukebox nodded in agreement. Doesn't matter what his name is. What matters is he taught those punks a lesson they won't forget. The veteran's truck disappeared into the distance, its headlights cutting through the dark. He didn't look back, knowing the bar was safe now, and that was enough. As the road stretched ahead of him, he allowed himself a rare smile. For tonight, at least, the world felt just a little bit more in balance.